This week, the Road to Cinema podcast talks with Ben and Alex Brewer on making the Justin Bieber music video, Where Are You Now? We'll also take a look at the process of developing and pitching music video concepts for artists, and the transition into directing their very first feature film, The Trust, starring Nicolas Cage and Elijah Wood. This gritty noir heist film is now available to watch on Netflix and to rent on other on-demand platforms. It's a detailed conversation on the day-to-day process of being a working director and how they collaborate with a crew, both creatively and logistically. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, to read the Road to Cinema blog, and to watch a Road to Cinema YouTube series, please visit jogroadproductions.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Jog Road Productions YouTube channel to watch our interviews with Don Cheadle, Greta Gerwig, Moon Zappa, and Saul Rubinek, discussing his experiences working with Clint Eastwood on Unforgiven. Follow us on Twitter @JogRoad, Instagram @JogRoad Productions, like our Jog Road Productions Facebook page. And don't forget to write us a nice review on the iTunes podcast page for the Road to Cinema podcast. And press that subscribe button to get an instant download of each week's episode. And now we join directors Ben and Alex Brewer as we take a look inside the making of the Justin Bieber music video, Where Are You Now? I thought to get started, we could talk a little about your music videos. Two of my favorites are Passion Pit Carried Away and also the one you did for Justin Bieber, Where Are You Now? And both of those are very different. You know, Where Are You Now is very conceptual, whereas Carried Away has much more of a narrative thrust to it. So I was just curious how you guys develop your ideas for music videos and how they kind of differ in certain ways depending on the song.
Yeah, thank you for saying the nice words about me. Yeah, it's the Passion Pit one. It's funny. I think that the idea there was that we've been making videos for a lot of kind of indie groups, and they're sort of dark, conceptually and maybe even physically dark, but and so we sort of had this idea okay, well, whatever we do next, we should try to make it a little bit more of a, because you're trying to get by as a working, so we okay, well, this Passion Pit video is a good opportunity to make something that's got a more of a commercial appeal with all these fun vignettes. But Michael wanted to, the lead singer of Passion Pit, the sort of mastermind of Passion Pit, he wanted to be, for him the song was dark in tone, and it was about, something that was not as light as the song sounded. So that's where we kind of got the idea of exploring a relationship in this fun way, but kind of having it be a reflection of realities. But the idea behind that one was just to make something that would help us get work, and it did. We ended up getting a couple of jobs because it was sort of fun and buoyant. And then the Bieber video, so we made that after we shot our film, and I think the music video world, I feel like it shifts in these different directions. So I would say 4 or 5 years ago, which isn't that long, obviously, but 4 or 5 years ago, I'd say that there was more little stories being told, or more narrative stuff. And then I think that maybe that's kind of run its course a little bit, or it just doesn't feel quite as. So then with the Bieber one, the Jack U people and him wanted to do something that had a public element, and they didn't quite know what. And so, we just sort of thought, well, what if you let people kind of graffiti on him? And the idea would be that, you're so used to seeing this guy sort of, I guess, in the context of certain, of what he's doing. You're so used to seeing him kind of doing his thing. So what if you just put him against a neutral background and kind of denuded him of his usual shtick, and what would people draw on him? Would they write on him? And the kind of, that one was more more inspired by the singer than the because people opinions of this guy and knowing him, and there's a huge spectrum of how people perceive him. So creating this venue where people could express that kind of on the blank canvas that is any performer.
So all of the people that came in that were in the video that were painting, so they had just been kind of randomly invited in and just told, draw whatever you think, might be appropriate in a way.
Yeah, we actually didn't tell anyone what to do, and it ended up being like, I thought that it was going to just be like Dick Central. Like, I just thought I people throwing dicks on it for 3 days. We were actually worried at one point that we weren't going to get any. It was like, it had been like the first day there wasn't a single dick pic. Well, so that's, and that became the thing, is that like you realize, you're like, oh, I mean, it was like, it ended up being like a very like kind of enlightening, moving experience, because we went in thinking like, oh, people are not going to take this seriously. They're going to be, they're going to fall into the trap we're setting of, criticizing this guy that they don't know, even though he's just kind of standing there and he's not even providing them with any fodder. He's just a person against white. But instead, like that was like our cynical view of like how this thing would go down. But then people came in, and like not only did it attract his fans, but it also just attracted people who saw that some sort of art thing was going on. So like there was this like incredibly endearing experience of being in this gallery where we hosted, if you see it in the video, but like we hosted in this gallery, and you would just stand, we had this kind of like place where we could look out gallery up, the like owner's like, room that he has that kind of looks out on the gallery, and you would just see this room full of strangers just diligently working on frames of the video, and I don't think anyone in the room knew like the final piece, what it would be like. No one had even put together that they were frames in a sequence, so that was the other thing. I thought someone would just know to write their Instagram name on like 40 of them, or whatever. Like I thought that would become like a problem too, but none of it. It was just like the most endearing thing of just like a completely random people coming together and like diligently working on. Yeah, and it was great to see really talented artists or professional artists, and people who have no experience, just picking up markers and doing whatever they wanted. And also the power of those guys. So it was Diplo, Skrillex, and then Justin Bieber was the guest, the featured artist, and they didn't make any announcement about the event, and we were sweating it. We're like, you have to have them start tweeting about it. You gotta let them know it's happening. And the day, so it was gonna be a 3-day thing in this gallery, and the day happened, we were opening at 6 o'clock, I think. That was like the first half. Diplo tweeted a picture of the door at 3. And I think some address, and we had a line around the block by 6.
Wow.
So I had no idea. And then I remember we were talking to some of Justin's people. We're like, well, you should let him, you should have him tweet it out. And they're like, oh no, there'll be a riot. Like you can't, you can't tell people. If anyone thinks he might, or if they hear that he's actually physically there, like it actually does cause like a state of emergency. Yeah.
Was he watching at all as people were participating in this?
He no, it's funny. Like it's the funny thing about the music video world, and I guess the world in general, is that you end up. When they turn out well, it's like everybody is your best friend, or it's like what is it? Success has 1,000,000 fathers, and failure has one. Well, probably not 1,000,000 fathers. Success has parents. Many fathers. I believe it's many parents. And parents, yeah. That's failure has one more. Yeah, so I think in this case, it was like a little bit of that, where they weren't like we should him for a day, and he knew the concept and liked it and thought it was going to be cool. And then we had a really hard time kind of getting the artists, the three of them, to like come to the gallery or like talk about it more than just like and then I think finally like we actually started getting a trickle where like, you know, Saturday there was a point where we only had like 10 people in the gallery, and I was like, this is insane, like this place should be like a madhouse. And there was talk of like having like the Jack, you guys like come and DJ a night and get things back going, and then none of that happened because they couldn't be bothered. And so then I think they sent out. I think Justin tweeted about it like Saturday night, and then Sunday we had like another like surge. But yeah, in general, I think that if it creates the illusion that everybody was really artistically invested in what we were doing, that's great. But like it was, I mean, the video ended up being like, you know, I think we even had to do an additional day of inviting artists we had met at the gallery to come finish the last like, you know, 30 frames or something, because we didn't even hit. We got close, but we didn't quite hit the goal.
All the frames we needed.
But of course,
we ended up doing some and getting a bunch of our friends to do it too. So,
but if those guys had been more active in it, we would have, you know, been able to do a friggin' feature film of it.
I was curious how you guys developed as a directing team, because, you know, people are always curious sort of how, you know, other teams like the Coen brothers or, you know, how two directors can really come together and have a consensus. Did you guys always have sort of a way of working where you almost had one brain, or you almost sort of had a consensus in how you wanted to execute things?
I think it helps. I mean, it's not like we just naturally see eye to eye on everything, but I think it helps, you know, focus us in our like preparation and our, you know, the pre-production process. Like basically, we have to get on the same page between the two of us before we even, you know, give any direction to anyone else. Which I think is a great way of kind of, you know, hashing out ideas and making decisions. And so then we get on the same page and we figure out our plan. But it helps us stay organized, which is really important.
And also, I mean, our writing process is like very much we kind of fight about things, and that's how we figure out, you know, our characters and our stories, and like, and I think that I actually have a hard time imagining people creating work that they really feel like they can kick the tires on and have it be fine without someone that is either your check for, you know, and I think we're that for both. We're both that for each other, you know, especially when it comes to anything having to do with like character or theme or structure, like some of these things that, like, you know, if you're, you know, at a certain point in your script and you're lost, you know it's because those things haven't been properly paid attention to to the degree that they should be. So sometimes you even think you're paying attention to it, and then you realize that there's a even greater degree, and that's where I think a partnership is like essential. And then directing it, obviously you're executing this thing that you worked out together for, you know, a year or more. What happens that we do have very similar taste when it comes to feature films. Like we have,
we have this, you know, the things we have the same goals where it counts, you know.
Yeah, I was curious, you know, transitioning from doing so many music videos and then into doing The Trust, which was your first feature. Was this a concept that you guys had been kicking around for a while? Was this something that you had really been thinking about as far as being your first film?
I mean, I guess we were, and this is something that I've realized only now, having, you know, been through, because we'd probably been doing the sort of like directing thing, whether it was music videos or whatever, for 6 years, I would say. And that's kind of like when we started getting hired. But what you realize is that you get into this mode of kind of like jumping from stone to stone, where you really want to be working, and you really want to, because you're also afraid of getting to a point where just gotta start driving for Uber. Like that's like kind of your main thing is like that, is there a way to do this and not need to succumb to the 9 to 5? So when you're doing music videos, you're kind of like, you're trying to book the next one, and you're coming up with ideas, and you're just pitching. And so then this film, The Trust, happened kind of within the vacuum of not booking that kind of work. And the nature of music videos and sort of the commercials we do, it's like we've never done like some crazy big budget thing. It's very much, we kind of live check to check. So it wasn't like we're like, oh, let's go, work on a passion project for a year. Like we were like, what can we be doing right now? And so we started writing the script, and it honestly came from like these, like, now I'm like kind of embarrassing reasons of like being like, well, like what kind of feature would someone let us make? Everyone says you can finance like a cop movie. Well, what's our version of a cop movie? Is there anything interesting about police? And of course, like at that time, there was like a million, and increasingly so. It's a lot that's interesting about police and the psychology and corruption. And then the evolution of it it was not born, I think, of some passionate place. It was born of it was probably wrong-headed where it all started, but now, like, in retrospect, you're like, oh, I get why it's important not to let your decisions be dictated by just trying to, like, keep going and keep having another thing, and so watch The Trust, I think, I know that this kind of, like, would anyone even let us make a movie? And the answer ended up being yes, but, like, at the time, it was kind of like, can we write something from where we're at in the industry and actually get someone to help to put some money into it, because it doesn't seem like a bad investment. And then from that point going forward, you of course develop it, and we kind of like learned how to write basically, and and found all the stuff that we like about it in there. But initially it became much more of that passion project after it had been greenlit, basically.
Did you guys? Where you were? I actually had interviewed Braxton Pope a while back, and I think at the time he may have been working on The Trust with you guys. So I was curious, did you develop the script a lot with him? Did you kind of bounce ideas?
I remember calling him in the driveway, and I honestly it started with thinking about, because he did obviously. He did our passion pit video with us, and that was the first thing we did together. And and we knew that he did features, and he was very open about like, well, if you have a script or a movie you want to make, let me know. And I think at the time we did, and it wasn't anything he was interested in. So then we were like, well, what can we get him interested in doing? And so I remember standing in the driveway being like, okay, well, what if we did like a crime thing, and we did it for like less than $1 million, and just like, try to make try to apply some of the things that we do in our music videos to this thing. And he was skeptical at first, because he's like, well, there's like, the TV space is like loaded with cop drama, cop shows. So finding an original take on it is like very difficult. And I think in the end, like where we started in terms of talking about it with like aesthetics and stuff, like I think like movies like Killing Them Softly bounced around, and then eventually that evolved to Fargo, bounced around, and then like in the end, I remember we were on set, and like because we evolved it, and Alex and I evolved it in the direction of like what's actually truly our own taste, which is probably more in the line of like comedy or just kind of observational humor. And so I remember being on set, and I think it like finally occurred to Braxton that like we weren't making anything that was like, I think he came up and he's like, is this a caper? And I'm like, Braxton, it might be a caper. Sorry, dude. But yeah, so early on, I would say we were like all kind of like thinking about it in this like hypothetical way, but then after we got Nicolas Cage in the movie like on board, the process that happened after that was like pretty much between Alex and I, and then we
also the original idea was to make something really small,
really small,
really realistic, as realistic as possible, trying to show how you might pull off a heist in the real world. But then once Nicolas Cage came on board and the budget grew, and suddenly we realized we had this real incredible opportunity to work with this actor and to make kind of the movie that our ideal version of the film. That's when we started to rethink things, and
there was so much rewriting. I mean, it was almost like Baby's first movie. I feel like Braxton probably had to read so many fucking drafts. I read so many drafts of it that he probably just
I know
eventually was like, what are these guys even doing? But he's the reason why the movie got made. So
yeah.
And his taste is is very high. So even though we started making something that maybe wasn't exactly his initial or any of our initial thought of what it was going to be, he stuck with it and really understood, and understood what was cool about it, and so that was good.
Yeah, I was curious. You talked a lot about pitching for music videos, and I was curious. What is the difference for you guys pitching for a music video to an artist versus pitching to, let's say, trying to get Nicolas Cage to be in your film, and sort of giving him that air of confidence.
Well, I think that
the Nicolas Cage one was different in that it actually happened in person.
Right.
He read the script and was interested and looked at our music video work, but then we actually went to lunch with him and were able to kind of seal the deal. Telling him in person our plan. Whereas music videos, you basically make your treatment. Which is text and images explaining what you want to do. You email that in to the label or the artist people. They relay that artist, but usually you don't end up actually communicating with the artist until you're on set, or if at all.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's really kind of you're really kind of detached from the artist when you're pitching in a way. For music videos.
And it varies. We did a Foster the People video where we had a meeting with them in advance.
And then the lead guy Mark immediately was got our numbers and started texting.
Yeah, and Michael Angelakis was the same thing. He was very much involved.
Yeah, and we're still friends with him, and yeah. So, but it really does vary. I think one thing with musicians, and this is why I think there's actors out there that are probably problematic in their personality. We haven't dealt with any or met any, but the one thing is musicians, they kind of are a walking brand, where sort of the scale of what they're doing is around them at all times, because they're playing concerts or they're looking at album sales or whatever. Whereas when I think of actors, it's all the sort of aggrandizing of the process happens when they're not around. So it's the people who are putting the financing together and are ripping each other's throats out, or and it's you're talking about millions of dollars, right? And then it's when the movie comes out, it's the playing in the multiplex on the big screen, or the billboards down Sunset Boulevard. But what the part that the actor's actually involved in is the make believe in front of a box that records it thing. And I think that and I think that's great. I think it's good that actors at least have the opportunity to preserve the magic. If they really want to, they don't have to be part of the brand conscious aspect of this. I mean, obviously actors become producers, and that's very common, but and so I think meeting with someone like Nick, you just sit and you talk about movies, and you talk about films you love and performances you love. And then when you're making the movie, you're like, it's just about these characters and this thing and ideas. And so it's like, and as the director, you're so cognizant of the giant machine that had to move to make this very moment happen. But in the moment, you're like sitting, you're in a garage with Nicolas Cage and Elijah Wood and your camera, and you're talking about the scene, and you're like, oh, this is like, it's amazing that we have anything in our culture that is like all this nonsense just to bring us to this like one very like pure, simple thing, which is drama, theater, performance. So I think that's a big difference too, is that you're just like, actors are like, the best actors I think are people who like seem blissfully unaware of like the nightmarish stuff that goes on behind the scenes in order to make the film happen. Like actors don't even watch their own movies; they just care about the making part, And I think that's cool too. Like musicians aren't like that. They live it every second.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that must be like a skill, for you guys to really master too, where, there's all this noise happening around, the money coming together, the logistics of a production being put together, but then, it all comes down to like that very narrow area where you're just working with the actors on the set, you're with the cinematographer, and, you finally have the opportunity to be creative without thinking about all those other elements.
Well, it's funny because, like, this used to be my least favorite moment on set, and I had to turn it into my favorite moment on set, because otherwise the panic kills you. But there's this great thing where you go through all the process of pitching, say it's a music video. You create this concept, and maybe they hire you because they think of you as someone who can make visuals that are different or new, and you're selling them on something that maybe you don't even know whether or not it's gonna like work or pull up right, or how long it will take to do the thing that you're talking about. And then you show up to set and you're like ready to make it, and it's like 6 a.m. and you're in LA, and it's cold. Because everywhere LA's cold at 6 a.m. And so you show up and you didn't bring enough, like, you put a jacket on, but you're just gonna. There's like a guy, and he's like, and you see all the, and there's a guy with a headlamp, and he's like smoking a cigarette, and he's slowly taking like stands off the truck, and you're like, at what point is this gonna become like this thing we told them we were gonna be able to do? And it's like, and every shoot starts that way. Every shoot starts with the least cinematic, most prosaic scene of miserable people in cold, moving heavy metal things, and so when you mentally prepare that like every day will start that way, every day will start with some element of like, when is this going to suddenly be a movie? It's like it's easy to kind of, I guess, compartmentalize rather the experience.
What was that first day like on the Trust when you're jumping into your first feature film? Here you are, first day, Nicolas Cage, Elijah Wood. Did it have that same element that you were talking about before, where it just seems like you were about to do the most simple shot, and sort of the closure of making this whole film seem so distant?
I thought so.
Yeah, I think a little bit. The very first day we shot the scene where it's the two of them in the bar, where Nick he's like first trying to get Elijah on board with the drug dealer, and in the place of like the crazy neon and whatnot. And we had done rehearsals with just us, Nick and Elijah, in like a warehouse space the weekend prior. I think it was like maybe a day or two before. And they just, they ran through the entire movie, and the dynamic, the chemistry between the two of them was so great, and so like immediately there, and like the way they were bringing their characters to life, like that was such an incredibly moving moment for us to hear our dialogue and our scenes, see them come to life in that way. So we were, and there's an air of uncertainty prior to that, just because we've never had our work translated on this scale before. And so, but we were so jazzed coming out of those two days of rehearsal with them. And this scene in particular was like, it was the first thing they did. Like, Elijah had just like arrived in Las Vegas, and he jumped right in, and it just, that scene came alive. So I think that, it was really exciting that day, to have that focus of just, okay, we're just gonna do this, like this, we're just gonna work on this incredible performance that they've already shown us.
Also, I think that day was the first day I realized that people who bitch about how exhausting directing a feature film is are like so full of it. It's not like, so I like after people. I think people who are like, oh my god, like I just finished my movie, I need to go get a massage. Like I could have done 3 of those back like easily. Like I felt that the videos like that is that right. Those like are the craziest ever attempt. Whereas movies, like, you're filming performance. It's like you're just picking where the camera should go. You're making some notes. You're trying not to give. The actors are there, who they are and what they bring to the role, and so you're not trying to confuse things. So in a lot of ways, you're like directing a film. It's like, I mean, you get that is the addictive thing, is that like after 5 years, like, cutting your teeth doing these like impossible things where you're creating all the spectacle for like, peanuts of small budgets. Then when you sit and realize that there's so much entertainment to be had with just writing and characters and these 2 great actors, you're like, oh my god, like I never want to go back to anything else. Like I could shoot forever this way,
Right. And being able to just focus on one scene, getting one scene right, or I think on our movie the most we would do, the busiest day was probably like 4 different scenes, different like locations and setups. But like on a music video, like you have to tell like this entire story in 2 days, or and usually with us, like because we're crazy enough that it involves like big visual effects or whatever that you're trying to work out as well. So in term, like compared to the pace that we were used to working at, like day to day on the film felt like a lot easier.
It's funny because I always would like look at like Woody Allen or something. I'm like, how? I mean, it's still impressive, but I'm like, how the hell is he directing movies? The man is in his years. Like, how could he possibly? Because like our concept of directing is like this like completely backbreaking, like physically like destructive thing. Whereas like when you actually film shoot a film, you're like, oh, there's like a way to do this that isn't like I could imagine someone older than 28 doing this. Like it's whereas before I was like, no, you drop dead.
Yeah, I think Clint Eastwood is 90, and he's already on to the next movie.
It keeps you young, I guess. Well, Clint Eastwood also shoots like 8 hours, like less than 8 hours a day or something. He's like, he figured it out. That's what I'm trying to say. So he was like, look, we do 1 take. We're done before lunch.
Yeah, I was looking at your website, and I saw that you sometimes do storyboards for the music videos. Did that carry over into The Trust? Were you drawing out any storyboards or even thinking about coverage?
We started very early on. Started doing some storyboards, but then it just, the pace of pre-production didn't really allow for that. Also, like we, a lot of our locations, very, very late. So it's a lot of kind of like, just quickly scouting the location, figuring out like what the blocking would be, what the camera move would be, preparing with Sean, our DP, ahead of time, kind of drawing out the diagrams, and then doing it on the day. So there wasn't really, the pace of the movie didn't really allow for storyboards.
It was a good learning experience though, because, and this is like I think a great um, what's the term, tip I would give to anyone who's about to direct a film, which is that if you have your druthers on a film in some way, like say your DP is like a friend who's like really committed, find a way to carve out like a week ahead of everything where you just go with your DP and you just look for locations wherever you're shooting. Then maybe you like get, you pay a location scout for like a couple days, or they give you some links, whatever. Like just do something where you can just have stuff to talk about, so that then if you really want to sit and start properly, because everything that happens, whether it's rehearsing, blocking, all this stuff, if you don't have your location set, like it's a waste of time. So there's no storyboard that's going to hold up. And we knew that. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Except what we didn't know is that Las Vegas is the most impossible place to shoot anything but casino stuff. Written a script with all these locations that in America you can find generally 300 versions of the sort of basic locations that we had described. And so like our in the normal context of, say, if we'd shot I don't know, in even like LA or somewhere like that, if you would storyboard, you'd be like, okay, we can like probably generally find what we're spatially talking about here. Whereas Las Vegas, they're like, oh, you want to shoot in in a grocery store? Well, here's like a 7-Eleven, and you're like, no, don't you have just like a regular? And they're like, no, we don't have anything regular. It's all a nightmare. So we ended up pushing the shoot a week to find more locations, and like me, Alex, Sean Porter, our DP, I think Scott Kuzia, our producer, we found like a bunch of locations, and that was a huge challenge. But then the other thing that the one thing that I wish we had, my last bit on the storyboards is that it would have been wise for us to storyboard we had this one car sequence that we should have storyboarded, but we didn't have enough time to shoot it anyway, so it kind of didn't matter. Like, we should have thrown some storyboards down for that. And then also, I almost think that storyboarding before you've shot a film is like I think after you shoot a film once, then storyboard to your heart's content. But like that first movie,
Storyboard the film you've already shot.
yeah, and, but like I think that you can, because like we were watching leading up to the film, we were watching like 3, sometimes 5 films a day, stuff that we thought was, we were watching it just to see coverage, just to see how the camera works. And you will overachieve in your designing of coverage if you haven't just been on a set and experienced actors, blocking actors for a scene. Like, and Sean knew that. Sean Porter was like, look, just like the way I like to do it is I put the lens on my still camera, I take shots while the actors rehearse, and then we look at the shots, and then we figure out what the best ways that how we want to show the scene. That's how he likes to work, and we ended up doing quite a bit of that, which I don't necessarily think we would do on our next film, but on this movie it was like
it was a nice way to work.
Oh, I like working that way is good, but like I think that like in the future I do think it's fine to storyboard, and I'd like to do that, and I think that that's a good method. But I think on that first movie, it's like you can't replace you'll think too hard about your camera if you haven't just watched actors do their thing. And we were thinking way too hard about the camera, like
right.
Way too hard, because we were just like music video people, and I don't know, you just tend to do that. So that's I don't know. Is there anything else about the storyboards?
No.
Yeah.
Well, I was curious. I was curious what films you were watching that sort of inspired you, because from looking at the film, it seems like a lot of 60s and 70s, crime, American crime films, or even if you go back to like Rififi, which is, from the French New Wave. What were some of the films that really inspired you as you were prepping?
definitely Rafifi. That's because that's just the best. That's the gold standard of a heist movie. And I think also a lot like the Friends of Eddie Coyle was a big influence. French Connection, like we're big William Friedkin fans, and early on those were the big influences.
The Sweet Smell of Success,
right, for that kind of character dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, we also
Thief, Michael Mann's Thief.
Yeah, we were watching some things to get ideas for coverage too. I think that there was like All the President's Men.
That kind of two-hander process driven. We wanted to have the drive kind of be this mystery that they're uncovering. So that was a big reference point for us, as opposed to this sort of the kind of like rather than having this conflict introduced early on that the characters are fighting against. We want to lean on the mystery of uncovering this opportunity and like putting the pieces together, and then conflict arises out of that.
And then with characters like John Hughes, like the African Queen, that was like a big one. Like
definitely that helped us. Because we saw the Nicolas Cage's character as being very similar to Katharine Hepburn's character, and then kind of the role, like the arc of Humphrey Bogart's character in that film. You can see traces of that in Elijah's character arc as well.
Our movie is like
it's a remake of
it's
the
oddly
African Queen.
intended to the African Queen. That movie's a masterpiece, and ours isn't, but it's but also just like looking at what the camera does. Like I mean, we tried to do some stuff that we believe in terms of telling a story visually. So like there's a scene at the beginning of the film where Nick is trying to convince his captain to green light or pay for green light. I'm using Hollywood terms here. He's trying to convince him to earmark money for a mobile crime unit. And so it's a Steadicam shot. It starts with them, and he's like pitching this whole thing. And then by the time the captain stops and says, "Look, we're not paying for this. We're not going to handle this," they've countered with the Steadicam, and they're on different sides of the screen. And so if you watch it, you just think like, oh, the Steadicam guy kind of backed up and then let them pass. But like it was carefully designed so that you like see this momentum of like Nick like pitching, be like, it's gonna be like this, it's gonna be like that, and then when they stop, they've swapped sides, and that was borrowed directly from, I want to say Marathon Man, but I think it wasn't Marathon Man. It was, but there was a similar scene where it's just this two shot, walking down a long hall, outside, actually, walking outside, and it was a character trying to convince the other character, and for some reason I can't picture him, but Roy Scheider was in this scene. I'm blanking, but so that's why I think it was Marathon Man. But at any rate, the director blocked it so that they would switch sides of the screen right when he like fully, they fully put the stop on the momentum. So like, we're big believers in the idea of like turning the sound off and being able to understand kind of what's going on. And so we were trying to borrow those sort of formal techniques, and even watching something like The Earrings of Madame D, the Max Ophuls movie, just like some of these people who were like became famous for how they moved their camera and how they designed coverage. So that's kind of, I mean, it was all over the map, but like each one kind of had its own weird reason why.
Yeah, and I think that we wanted the blocking to dictate the camera moves, and we didn't want to rely on being so cutty and trying to figure it out in the editing room. We tried to block and choreograph our shots as carefully as we could.
Oh, there's also a movie Bob Le Flambeur.
Yep,
which we actually kind of ripped off.
Well, there's a scene in that where they map out they're going to rob a casino, and they map out like the layout of, I think, the basement on a giant football field. And they did it with paint, painting lines on a giant football field. And we thought like, oh, that'd be funny if it was one person taping out this entire diagram. Like, who painted that? Like, how long did that take? And that kind of became the inspiration for the rooftop scene where Elijah has the layout of the apartment taped out.
Yeah, so I guess we didn't rip it off.
Not completely. It's an homage.
It was interesting. I heard you guys in another interview talk about how, Las Vegas really wasn't, what you had in mind when you were working on the script, that it sort of came about because I guess Nicolas Cage lives in Las Vegas and sort of likes to bring film production out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like everything that we were intending with our first draft of the film, like, I guess what you start to realize is that you can have filmmakers who you wish you were, but then at some point you have to figure out the filmmaker that you actually are, And I think that and maybe it's just coming from music videos where aesthetic is so, or in commercials where aesthetic is all anybody kind of favors, but you start to see that certain kinds of directors or certain kinds of filmmaking genres, whether it's your David Finchers or your Terrence Malick's or your Harmony Korine, some of these people, to me, those kinds of directors are so brilliant, or Michael Haneke. These guys are brilliant at what they do, but I think that they allow for a lot of up and coming directors to get lost in sort of a certain level of insecurity, where it's you just become obsessed with look and aesthetic and wanting to be taken seriously and making a serious movie. So when we first were writing our script, I think we thought, we'll set it in Boston because we grew up outside of Boston, and we'll know great locations to go to, and they'll have this grit to them. And I think our initial pitch for it was we want to make a movie that's Primer, that Shane Carruth movie Primer, except about a heist. So it's you're looking at these two very kind of serious, nerdy guys who are planning a very technical but very realistic heist. So that's kind of where we started. And now in retrospect, it's that's all exterior stuff. That's nothing interior. That's nothing character. That's nothing that's not saying anything. That's just sort of the idea of what your fantasy is about the kind of movies that you make as a feature film maker. And so Las Vegas now for me represents that growth period of being because if you're not shooting a movie in Las Vegas about casinos, it is the hardest thing to make look cool on earth. It's just it's just not a place that has style. Anything that has style they rip down. Anything that's that's a cool old classy whatever, we're demolishing it. We gotta get a Dave and Buster's in here immediately. It's just not. This is not a hip town, except for the kind of except for if you were trying to do a gambling centric film, and even then it's a challenge now to try to capture what people like Scorsese and so forth did. And so that's what I think of when I think of Vegas. Is I think the awakening to being don't try to be filmmakers that, or try to ape filmmakers that you will protect your sense of being a serious director. Just find truth, just find honesty in characters and what makes you get excited.
And I think it was a nice challenge too of having to film in a location that wasn't exactly what we thought of initially, because then you sort of open yourself up and look at what the material you have and try to find what's cinematic about it, what hasn't been seen before, about trying to kind of dig a little deeper, and I think that was actually a very helpful thing for us on this film.
Yeah, well, I know Jerry Lewis is also another person who actually lives in Las Vegas, and I was curious. Jerry Lewis must do one film a decade, if that. So, how did it even come about to even consider having Jerry Lewis be in the film?
We had a second lunch with Nick, and he said he's like I've always wanted to have Jerry Lewis play my father in a film, because we were talking about his character's home life and all that, and and he's friends with Jerry, and Nick kind of actually kind of set that up, and yeah, we thought like, well, that is like an incredible opportunity to have him in our movie. How can you pass that up?
Yeah.
And it worked for the I think it worked for Nick's character, in a almost meta kind of way.
Yeah, it is one of those casting decisions that it is like, I mean, I can't believe that we've met Jerry Lewis. Like, that's like an insane thing. Like, I didn't think if you grabbed me, even a couple years ago, we're like, yeah, you're gonna like have lunch and then shoot Jerry Lewis, I'd be like, what? Really? Are you kidding me? So, and I think that, I don't know, like, I'm sure it's like, I'm sure it's endlessly distracting, like, but at the same time, like,
a scene with Nicolas Cage and Jerry Lewis must be committed to film.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think too. And I think it helps you think of that character, because it's a weird way of foreshadowing it, because you can't help but think of Jerry Lewis as Jerry Lewis, especially because he so rarely appears. And I think for younger audiences, obviously they don't even know who he is, so it's not like, so that's just like, oh, that's the guy playing his dad. And then everyone else, it kind of gives this like weird, who knows of his career, which is most people, but it gives you that weird foreshadowing of like, what does it mean that Jerry Lewis is playing this guy's dad? I thought this guy was just kind of like a straight-laced guy. It adds a little bit of oddness at the very beginning to sort of help, I think, you see where that guy might be going.
Right. He's not quite what you expect.
I think it's always.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think it's always interesting, how an actor can really bring something to the character that is sort of, not always apparent on a page when you're reading a screenplay. That sort of an actor's history, iconography, really sets the tone for the audience of who this person could possibly be.
It's funny. We just saw that movie Get Out, which is great, and really worth it. And I think Alex and I have both become like these obsessive casters now, like, because like I think once you go through that process of casting a film and thinking about, and I think arguably people would look at the cast of our movie and be like, you put Jerry Lewis and like Sky Ferreira and say like, what the frig is going on? So like I think like if you just looked at that, you'd be like, these guys are obsessed with casting, okay. But no, you think really hard about what you want to say and what how you can keep the audience involved. So yeah, we saw that movie Get Out, and it's really great. And Alex was like, and Catherine Keener's in it, and she plays this menacing character. And Alex, she's good, she's fine. Catherine Keener's awesome, but like, Alex is like, that should have been Meryl Streep. That would have been and he was right. Like, it would have been like the perfect.
It's a real controversial statement to
No,
suggest
but like
Meryl Streep for any part.
No, I know. But in this case, it would have been like and this is why I bring it up, is just because Meryl Streep has done everything under the sun. Like, she's that's what she's known for, is that she's like an incredible actress who has like done a ton of work. Oh, we're still. Oh, sorry. And at any rate, so the idea of like coming up with a great casting idea for someone like that is like, that's what makes you be like, oh, that's awesome. So Nicolas Cage is a similar thing, where like he has done a ton of work, and he's played a ton of characters. So coming up with an idea of what to do with him suddenly feels like, oh my God, we're earning our keep here, that we're like figuring out, because I think it's like, it's much easier to conceive of someone who is, works infrequently, or like, is just coming up. Like you can kind of like, you don't have this sense of culturally where they stand, but like if you can come up with a casting idea for people that are like so cemented in the culture, it feels really exciting. Or like we just read some script recently, and Alex was like, Tom Hanks. I'm like, yes, it's like, and you're like, why would I freak out about like obviously Tom Hanks is like in everything, but like he's in all big movies, but like so like I don't know, maybe I'm not making sense, but like I just think that like if you can find good roles for people who have played a ton of characters, it's like you get so stoked,
Right.
I was curious, how has the experience and the trust really shaped you guys on projects that you want to, work on next, and if maybe you could even share if there's another feature film that you guys are developing.
Yeah, well, we're writing a new script that's almost done that is not a crime thing or a genre thing.
Yeah, we kind of wanted to do something that was, that moved in almost the opposite direction as it's still a comedy, dark comedy, but just in terms of the subject matter, just try to do something really, really different.
And I think the big takeaway on the trust, and it's something that I tend to see sometimes in screenplays, where like we'll get sent scripts and you'll read it and you sometimes I wonder like, oh, has this writer watched a movie shoot? Because, and obviously this is like something that like we did when you write a script that you're going to shoot in 24 days and it's got like 40 locations or something, you suddenly like, oh, maybe there's something to learn here about, how to parse out, a film in terms of scenes and not in terms of this like kind of like rolling series of, moments. And so that's mainly the takeaway from the trust, I think, is that we're trying to write material now with our new script where it's all about the actors. It's not like, it's about creating a script where when it comes to financing it and putting a schedule together, it is designed so that we're not jumping from location to location to location and like and asking actors to piecemeal their emotional moments. Like recently, I saw an interview with Michael Shannon where he talked about how the best experience he had on a movie was working on Sidney Lumet's last film, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, because he had like a pretty small supporting role in it. He's like, but we rehearsed it like a play, which obviously Lumet famously did, is he like would rehearse his movies for like 2 weeks before they shot. And he's like, so it was the first time I was ever able to like actually get there and know where I fit into the puzzle. He said, because, usually you're like, just as you're feeling it on camera, someone comes up to you and touches up your makeup and you're not in it anymore. So our new project, like we're trying to like take a big page out of that sort of like Lumet handbook and be like, is there a way to, and in a cost-effective, responsible way, put together an indie film that is like completely allowing for a great performance to happen. So that's kind of the focus now, is just figuring out like a how to distill things so that it can just be about two people,
Yeah, and I think we learned that from working with Nick and Elijah, that like the performance is everything, the characters are everything, and your film, your story should really accommodate that as best as possible.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing too, that like, well, what's interesting to me is how the writing and performance is something that like does not lose its luster. Like everything else has its moment of being impressive. Whether it's like certain way of shooting or a visual effect or even a certain type of story, you know, like all those things, but it's like ephemeral. It just kind of like people move on and they need something else. And it seems, you know, dated. But the one thing that like never loses its anything is just people, you know, speaking, you know, words and telling stories. Like for some reason, like you still stand a chance at like keeping someone's attention. And I think that's great because that means that you can, you know, make movies for very little, which they need to be made for very little, you know, 90% of them, but still, you know, compete. Like that, you know, Moonlight winning is like so great. Like, I mean, could you ever see a better thing? Like, you literally have one movie that is like an all singing, all dancing, like, are you entertained? God damn it!
With
And
big
then you have this
movie
other movie
stars
that's, like,
and
three people talking.
Yeah.
For $1 million.
For $1 million.
That was great about Moonlight too, is that it, you know, didn't have, you know, big major movie stars in it. You know, you were looking at you know, real people, you know, inhabiting these roles. You know, great actors who had established careers, but you know, they weren't, you know, front of the line names that, you know, you would recognize.
Yeah, yeah, and in the case of like Naomi Harris, like, you know, she was unrecognizable. Like,
Yeah, they disappeared into their characters.
Yeah, and also I think that that's a film that and this is the other thing that we're trying to do with our new movie is realize that like people, and this is something that all artists should do, and maybe it's something that kind of got perverted by how lucrative films were for the longest time, you know, through the 90s and all that. Like, I mean, movies made a lot of money, and so you could but like, I think now since turning a profit with a film and getting people's attention and getting people's time, which is now completely divided among all kinds of different platforms of entertainment. You know, if you're really gonna like ask for somebody's eyeballs for 90 minutes, like, you have to make sure that you are like expressing something that has a universal truth, that has the potential for like a true catharsis, you know. And so like, I think that Moonlight is a great example of a film that has a very specific story, that you are gaining a perspective that wasn't previously given that, you know, voice, that level of whatever. But also at the same time, you know, you're doing it through universal things that we can all somewhere deep down like relate to, in terms of that, the journey of that person. Like, I think that that story is about growing up, and I think that you know, so that's what we're trying to do with our work now, is just make sure that like we're not coming out the second time. You know, we want to come out with something that's like entertaining, like incredibly entertaining. But we want to make sure that we're not coming out with something that is like could ever be considered like a waste of your time. You know, and I guess that's like seems like the most basic thing to say about why you make a movie.
The simplest things are often the hardest to achieve.
I think, yeah, definitely.